Welcome to Kent County Levy Court committee meetings. It's Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. We're in the Kent County Levy Court chambers, room 203. And before we start, I'll let the county administrator read the phone rules.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening's meeting is a committee meeting, and we do have guests that may be joining the meeting virtually over a telephone conference line. And I understand we do have at least one caller on the line right now. And so we ask that everyone that speaks, when you speak, if you could proceed your comments by stating your name for the record. You'll notice on the agenda that there are various points along the agenda where we provide opportunity for public comment, and at that time we will invite our guests who are joining over the conference line, as well as those in the audience, to address Levy Court. And for those that are on the conference line, we're going to keep you muted during the meeting to avoid background noise, and at the appropriate time we'll ask you identify yourself by pressing *1 on your phone, and that will indicate to us that we can release you into the meeting. You want to speak to us, and we'll ask you to state your name for the record before proceeding with any comments that you provide. This is an official meeting of the Levy Court, and as such, all rules of procedure adopted by the Levy Court are in effect, including the Mason's Rules of Order. Mr. President, turn the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I see we have 7 commissioners present. So we do have a quorum. First item on the committee meeting for this evening is Finance Committee. Turn it over to Commissioner Maston.
Our first item tonight will be the Town of Viola proposal, request for Community Projects Contribution Fund, aka Policy 30 Fund Grant. Commissioner Sweeney, since this is in your area, could you please take the lead?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Maston. You all see the letter in the packet. We do have members of the Town of Viola here. I believe that Steve Jingosian is going to take the lead. So, Steve, you can approach the... Betty Torbert's also with us. She has copies of different items. So if you want to just give it to whomever, just give it to the first person and they'll pass them down. Thanks. And then the floor is yours, Steve.
You want me to take this off? Good evening. I'm Councilman Steve Jingosian from the Town of Viola. I am joined today by one of our other officers, Betty Torbett, our Chief of Police, Jamette Cooper, and one of our committee chairs, George Mayer. We are here today to ask for your support in helping us to partner, continuing the great and exciting work we're doing in the Town of Viola. In a relatively short period of time, we've aggressively pursued improving the quality of life of our citizens, making our town a better place to live. We reenacted the original Viola Police Department, which was started many, many years ago. We got that back up and running. We are now supporting 2 part-time police officers. We relatively recently purchased the previous Methodist church in Viola to convert that into a town hall. Fortunately or unfortunately, it needs a tremendous amount of work. We've already started a lot of the major projects. There was, without the whole laundry list, are some items on the list, but we started with the structural problems. There was foundation problems from drainage problems that were kind of rotting away at the building. We just finished putting a new roof on. So we've got the top and the bottom done. Now we're starting to work in the middle. This facility serves as our police station. It also serves as our community center and also where we hold our meetings. So we do things like holiday parties, holiday gatherings. About 5 years ago, we started a town picnic. A number of things where we can all come together. We started with a get to know your neighbor event where a lot of us, we wave when we see each other, but it was difficult to put a name to the face. So there's some of the things that we started doing. Lots of other things being discussed currently. even some of the local community that wanted to have a wedding chapel in our facility. So right now, we don't have any water, we don't have bathrooms, we don't have septic. The roof was a major project. It was a full tear-off replacement. Pretty much everything, HVAC. So we've started a significant amount of the work. We want to keep going. Same thing, just so that originally we were meeting at the Roriton Club, which actually wasn't even in the town of Viola. We're grateful for them letting us use their space, but now we have our own space and the town is recognizing it. So we're asking for your partnership to help us continue the work that we're doing so that we can improve the quality of life of our residents and, make Viola the best it can possibly be. And we're welcome to field your questions.
Thanks, Steve. There's the police chief is going to speak also on, can we ask the chief to come down?
Sure.
That way we can get all of that discussion out of the way and then discuss the document that was shared with us. This is Police Chief Cooper. Thanks for being here, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the committee. I'm Chief Jamette Cooper with the Viola Police Department. The primary goal that we have, we currently work in the same building as Town Hall, and we currently don't have any running water or sewer at that facility. So it kind of makes it difficult to actually do witness interviews or anything of that sort because people have to use the bathroom. So that is something that would greatly benefit us in performing our duties. And also we are trying to fortify the evidence storage area inside that building to ensure that the evidence can maintain chain of custody in a secure manner. And that's pretty much what we are hoping a partnership with Kent County will help the residents of Viola.
So Chief, none of the items for actually doing the storage lockers and secure areas is included in what was shared with us. Is that going to be separate, or is that like phase 3, or?
I would believe it's going to be phase 3. It's going to be
Okay.
down the road. First concern is pretty much sewer
Gotcha.
at this point in time. So, thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Steve, you can step back up. I have a couple questions I can ask. So Steve, to date, you've already done about a little over $30,000 worth of work on the town hall.
Correct.
I've had some meetings in there, and it's pretty darn cold in the winter, so I give you guys a lot of hearty credit for doing that. Out of these items on here, is the septic system top priority?
It is at this phase. Certainly, we wanted to make sure that our foundation was solid and that our roof was dry and safe before we spent money inside. Some of the structural and water damage issues that were a result of poor drainage were paramount to address, which is what we did very, very shortly after we purchased the building. Now that the roof is done, we're ready to move on. But the septic makes the most logical sense. When we were one of our last town picnics, we had to rent porta potties and stuff, which isn't the end of the world, but we do meet there regularly. And as it's evolving, members of the community are asking to use it for their function as well.
Cool. Any of the commissioners have any questions for the town of Viola? So my pleasure is to pick an item and help pay for it moving forward, knowing that they're going to make an effort to turn this into a community place for all of the town of Viola and anybody else to use. And I think that the septic system, Commissioner Angel?
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Pettermouse, what's the maximum we've given to a town to help them out, whatever it's a dog park or whatever, and they've always come back because they don't have the funds, but they come back and show us where the money went?
Yeah, well, the maximum that we gave in one grant, I believe, was to the town of Little Creek for the dog park, and that was $35,000. There may have been a few other situations where we've given multiple smaller grants that add up to a comparable amount, but they were over a course of a few years. thinking about like the Bowers Beach Museum, perhaps. We've done several different things there. But I think the single one that sticks in my mind would be the Little Creek Dog Park.
Mr. Sweeney, you were thinking of how much when you said one item, so
Well, the septic system is their highest priority, which even if you get a septic system, doesn't really work very well if you don't have water too.
Yes, correct.
So, and then if you have water, then you need heat in order to keep water, from freezing pipes. And so there are some considerations there. Or if they want to move forward, they have to make certain decisions now to get everything done, so.
that's why I was asking that. And I knew the 35,000 was the issue, and with septic, bathrooms, and a well, that's 35,000.
Yeah.
That's enough to have running water and a bathroom working. So that's what I was looking at. So, since we try and keep everything equal to when we do something, that's what I was looking at.
Commissioner Buxton?
Commissioner Sweeney, I'm in favor of assisting the town of Viola, certainly. I do like the consistency that we try to offer. I like the partnership. It's a project of $50,000. I would caution us from going greater than 50% of the share in keeping with the consistency. I would state that in the past, what we've done is identified the first phase, which might be a septic system of sorts, and partner to the tune of whatever you might want to consider that, and then move to the second phase, or in this case, maybe the fourth phase, which might be HVAC, whatever it is. They could draw down a total of $25,000. They could draw from that, something like that, which is similar to what we've done in the past, correct, Mr. Pettit-Dimash?
That's correct.
So that would be a suggestion. I don't know where you're going. I didn't know the number that you're looking at or what your motion was getting ready to be. I was waiting to hear. But I don't like framing it around it's just me, right? I don't like framing it around the Little Creek model at all. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
So, Mr. Pettit-Dimash, when we helped out Little Creek with their dog park, what was their contribution to the dog park?
They had the land,
Right.
and there were some other donations, material donations from the Little Creek Fire Department, and I believe that was pretty much the situation. And of course, they're maintaining it after the fact. So, but
Right.
I don't think they had a whole lot to put towards the project themselves. I may be mistaken. Perhaps Commissioner Angel knows a little more about it, but my recollection was that it was largely contingent upon the county's resources.
So, Mr. Jingosian, the $20,000 for the septic system, I understand that's an estimated cost. You don't have a firm final cost for that.
That is in the process. We have a designer working on the system as we speak. So no, we do not have a final cost on it yet, but we're moving in that direction.
But it could be more.
We kind of went about with average from other similar type properties that we knew of, so we had something realistic to compare it to. I guess certainly it could be not my area of expertise, but we did do a perk test a while back, so we know we're digging in the right area, for lack of a better phrase. That preliminary work has all been done. I believe the permit with DENREC was already opened. Do we know, so our permit was already open. So, we've started laying the groundwork for anticipating if we have to go left or go right to make that decision.
Gotcha.
But correct, that is not a final total at this point.
Mr. Buxton?
And again, we're just having a conversation, right? Normally, I like it better. Typically, during this time, we're at a table, just kind of hashing it out. But, a different map also is you have a total budget of $50,000, and specifically, the Levy Court sponsors $20,000 for the septic in its totality. We've done that before, right? Or if you want to pick a little higher number. So I didn't want to. Again, we're just talking. I'm sure you know all this anyway, so I'm not trying to feed your knowledge. But those are a couple of things that we're very familiar with that we've done in the past that stay consistent to what we've done in the past. That's all I'm looking for.
President Pepper?
Thank you. I think what we're trying to do here is help the town of Viola create a town hall. And they've already spent $45,000 to purchase the building.
Yes.
Plus you've put another $32,000 and
About 33,165 spent.
$33,165 on top of that.
Yes.
So, if we wanted to look at it as creating a town hall instead of doing the repairs on the building that they purchased, I mean, that could give us a little bit more leeway.
Well, it would be 45 for the building and 33,165 for repairs thus far.
So if you're looking at it as creating a town hall instead of doing just the repairs to the town hall, then I think it would give you a little bit more leeway.
Commissioner Hall?
I was just going to follow up. Going to Commissioner Buxton, I like the idea of partnership, but overall, I mean, the numbers listed here come out to about $80,000. And Commissioner Angels I thought had a good blueprint there, covering the septic system, the well, and the bathrooms, sort of health and safety baseline at the very least, and puts a good footprint. County's definitely making a contribution, but not even 50%, but I think that's a nice way to bundle it, so I could support that.
Commissioner Angel?
Thank you. This is where the police department's also going to be held too, at City Hall.
Yes.
So with no running water, no bathroom facilities, I think it's detrimental. You have something there.
Correct. Yes, sir.
So
Anybody else? Yes. Commissioner Buxton?
And where are we then? Are we looking at back to the original?
I think we're sitting at 35.
So I just want you to remember, the town of Frederica, it was a $100,000 project, right? So what are we telling them? We're going 50 now? Because I don't think we should. But I just want, it's not our money. We need to partner. Just make sure that we think all this through. Okay? That's all. And listen, I don't want to hurt the town of Viola at all. But, that we have to make sure that we're... Anyway, I've said enough. If you want to do 35, let's do it. But remember, there's always a ripple effect. There's always a ripple effect.
All right, so the consensus up here seems to be about 35,000. If we were to able to, what we would do is set aside an account, and then as you got those things, bills or invoices in for those items when you secure the cost for the sewer, you would, Mr. County Administrator Pettit-Demange, they would submit that bill to us?
Yes, depends on how we want to do it. The way we drafted a draft motion was that would be, funds would be dispersed when various permits were obtained. So for example, if it was a septic system and, the permit was obtained and they had the contract for the work to be done, then that could be, we would release whatever, if you said X amount of dollars for that, we would release it at that time.
And release it to the town, and then the town would pay it?
Yeah,
Okay.
We wouldn't pay the contractor directly, we would pay the town, then they would pay the contractor. And similar could be done for, the well, HVAC, all those things require permits, so there's something that we can connect it to, the disbursement, so that we know that it's moving forward, That's typically how we've done it in the past. We've tried to tie it to some type of a, permitting gate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, Commissioner Angel?
yes, thank you, Commissioner Sweeney. I believe also we had the town of Little Creek come back after to give us a rendition of where the money went. And I would suggest, since we're going to keep things copacetic and even across the board, that we've asked the town of Viola to do the same thing.
I would insist on that, absolutely.
That sounds good. Maybe you can drag the judge in here.
So Commissioner Sweeney, are we on 35,000?
Yeah, so I led the discussion. I'm going to turn this back over to Commissioner Masson to call the consensus, and then she'll call for any public So, Commissioner
Do we
Massey?
have a consensus to move forward with a grant of $35,000 and place on the consent agenda for next week's meeting? Show of hands. 6 and 1. Is there any public comment, both here and anyone on the phone have any comments they would like to share?
If we have any callers on the phone line who wish to address Levy Court on this matter, please press star 1 on your mobile device. We can bring you into the room. Okay, it appears that the online callers don't want to say anything.
Okay, and no comment here. Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, and I guess we'll be moving that forward to the next business meeting,
Correct. It'll be on consent agenda.
consent agenda. Mrs. Masson, that's fine with you, consent agenda.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Steve, George, Betty, Chief, thanks for coming. We appreciate you guys coming out tonight.
Thank you very much for your time and your support. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is the Planning Services Committee. Mr. Buxton.
Mr. President, I know we have several members that are joining us tonight. Ms. Kiefer, do you want to start us off? That'd be great.
Good evening, Commissioners. As many of you know, we've been working with DelDOT the past several months on 3 different transportation improvement district projects. They're at various stages. 2 of them are from the master planning areas, right, Little Heaven and South Frederica. The other one is the Cheswold area, which is an employment center identified in the comprehensive plan. Tonight is to give you an overview of what these projects are, how they will proceed. The end result, hopefully, is the Levy Court agrees to sign on to the 3 agreements, sort of initiating this process. These agreements are indeed iterative. You will see them again as they get revised throughout the process. But to give you an overview of how TIDs work, I would turn this over to Mark Cote, who's the planning director at DelDOT, and Sarah Coakley, who runs the TID program at DelDOT.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay if I talk like this? Okay, great. So before I get into the agreements, I wanted to give an overview of transportation improvement districts and how they work. So you may be wondering, what is a TID, or transportation improvement district? So it's a geographic area that's defined for the purpose of securing the required transportation improvements in that area to support the future land use in that area. And it's a place where the land use and transportation is planned in enough detail in advance that development consistent with that planning can pay a readily determined fee instead of conducting a traffic impact study. So normally developments that generate enough traffic, 50 peak hour trips or 500 daily trips, have to do what's called a traffic impact study and identify where improvements are needed, and then make like pro rata share contribution to the off-site improvements. With a TID, instead of doing that, they pay a readily determined fee. And before that, DelDOT actually does basically an area-wide traffic study for the entire TID. And we work with the county to identify the needed improvements, and then those improvements are partially funded through the fee structure. And then the purpose is to provide a better mechanism to fund the needed transportation improvements to support the land use. And the goal is to have TIDs in areas where growth is planned in the comprehensive plan. So why create a transportation improvement district? So it allows for comprehensive infrastructure planning. So ordinarily with the traffic impact study process, DelDOT is often responding to land use, often after it's approved. With a TID, we're working together with the county to make sure that the transportation improvements keep up with development. Also, TID projects advance quicker in our capital transportation program. We have a 6-year capital transportation program, and we have a prioritization process with 7 different criteria, and one of them is economic development. And then within that criteria, projects that are in TIDs get extra points. Also, TID fees stay local, since the fees are instead of doing a traffic impact study and offset improvements. They're basically like a transportation impact fee, so they have to be used only within the TID that they're collected for. And then equitable treatment of competing developers. Sometimes we hear that it's like the last development in an area will come in and have to do a lot of transportation improvements because previously smaller developments came in that didn't have to do a study and didn't have to contribute. So with a TID, everyone pays, even the smaller developments. Also, known costs for developers. So with a traffic impact study, they have to do the study first, which can take 6 or 9 months before they even know what they have to do. So with the TID, they know what their costs are up front, and that can actually help them like get a bank loan and financing for the development easier. In their pro forma form they fill out, they'll know, what the costs are for their development for the transportation improvements. And then expedited development reviews. Again, it can take 6 to 9 months to do a traffic impact study. So with a TID, that eliminates that time frame from the development proposals. So characteristics of a good TID include being located in the state strategies, levels 1, 2, or 3. Also in locations identified for planned growth in the local government's comprehensive plan. Several parcels likely to be proposed for redevelopment or development. They work really well with multiple large parcels and multiple owners. Not too big, not too small. This is just a listing of the different TIDs. The first 3 listed there are what we're going to be discussing tonight, and then the other ones are TIDs that are either in operation or finishing up and will be in operation soon. And then it's best for them to follow natural boundaries, not roads where possible. If they're going to follow roads, it needs to be like limited access roads, like Route 1, for example, because what we don't want is development on one side of a road to pay for the cost of the improvements on that road, and then developments on the other side of the road not to. So that's why that's one of the criteria.
Can we hold there for a second?
Yes.
Can you go back? There you go. Thank you.
Yep.
Simple question. First of all, appreciate you being here.
Yep, no
and
problem.
it's an exciting time. This really is, because I think it's going to do a lot of good. But that's the question I have for you. Pick one up there that's functioning, has been in play for a while, and tell us how it's doing. Do you know
Yep.
how they're doing?
Yeah, so Westtown has been in place for years, and it's doing really well. It's about half built out, and about half the projects are done, and it's going well. Like it actually like created a video at one point that showed like a time lapse on aerial of the development and roads coming in, and you could see how the roads were coming in either before or at the same time as development, not afterwards. And then Southern Newcastle County, that one's been around for a little bit less time, 2014 is when the initial agreements were signed with that one. But same thing, it's encouraging and helping development to come in quicker. The key is that it incentivizes development that's consistent with the plan. So if it's not consistent with the plan, if they're coming in at something like much higher density, then they would still have to do a TIS. So it encourages development to come in that's consistent with the plan. Yep.
Commissioner Buxton.
Sweeney.
Thank you, sir. So my question would be, I would take Westtown and Easttown, but Westtown is so big. I mean, 4 square miles, I know that doesn't sound like much, but with everything that went in up there, when you first did that TID, how many years ago was that? That's just been probably a dozen years ago at least.
I think when was the initial one, Mark? 2007, I think?
So 13 years ago, 14 years ago. So at that point, you didn't know how much it was going to develop. So how are you able to discern how much a developer would pay for improvements, not knowing how many developers there were going to be?
Yep, so I'll get into this more a little bit later in the presentation, but basically, once the improvements are identified, DelDOT helps put a cost to them, and then we negotiate amount of contribution. So right now, the developer contributions vary anywhere from 20 to 50% of the costs. So in like Southern Newcastle County, that's a lot bigger. The developers are covering half. In Westtown and Easttown that are smaller, they're covering 70 and the state's 30, I think. because there's less improvements, so then they can pay like more towards it. But so it's a balancing act of trying to make sure that the fees per unit or per square foot don't discourage development.
Right.
And then monitoring, basically every 5 years at least, we'll want to look at the land use and like what has actually been approved and been built, and reevaluate what is the future from that standpoint, and model the traffic, and also make sure we collect updated traffic counts as well.
So in our instance, the Little Heaven TID and the South Frederica TID, we couldn't even begin to tell you if there's any interest of any businesses or any developers wanting to move in there. So once you do a TID and one person comes in over the next 12 years, if they're paying 50%, they're not actually paying 50% of the total cost. They're paying, all the developers would pay the 50% and then the state would cover the rest, right?
Yes.
So how you just, because what I don't want to do is like you've already mentioned, I don't want to make it so high that a developer says, yeah, no, I don't want to do that, because I've already had that happen in the last 20 years in the Camden area with a developer I was hoping to come in. I just don't want to run into that again.
Yeah, so we do require like public involvement for the service standards, which basically define what is considered adequate transportation facilities. And we recommend having public involvement for other parts of it too, including the fee discussion, to make sure that we're not, going to discourage development.
Or
make
put
it
too
harder
heavy a
for
burden
folks.
on. Is there an appeal process if the developer thinks the burden's too high?
No, but I mean, we would look at making adjustments, like
Okay.
through the amendment procedures.
All right, thank you.
Just to that point of reference, the developer in Camden, DelDOT, I think, identified specifics that they wanted that particular project to fully fund out. The TID doesn't work that way. They identify maybe what needs to be available to service the entire district, and then each developer pays a percentage. So it wouldn't match that description, would it? It wouldn't be similar to that.
No, so basically, just as an example, say there's like $10 million worth of improvements identified, and we want like the development community, future development, to contribute 50%. That would mean that everyone that comes in is going to contribute 50%, so 5 million total. So then we would base the fee on the expected number of units and square footage that are expected to come in based on the underlying zoning, or in this case, based on the master plans. And so they wouldn't, like, one development wouldn't pay for half the cost of all the improvements. They would just pay their portion based on the size of the development.
Now, that helps. I mean, Adela did not do a traffic improvement district for the Camden area. Because there's grottos, there's McDonald's, there's a Chipotle going in there, there's the apartment buildings. There was no TID done for that area, which would have helped for all the traffic light and all the construction that's been done in Camden. But there was not a TID done for Camden, right, Mark? I didn't think so. Okay, thanks.
So how does a TID work? We start with an initial TID agreement. And so it would be between DelDOT, the county, and then for the South Frederica master plan area, the town of Frederica would need to be a partner with that. There's a couple parcels within town limits that would be in the TID. And so I've contacted the town manager there, and we're working on coordinating and getting a meeting set up with them, but he seemed very receptive to the idea of the town being included. And basically the initial TID agreement includes what's called the target horizon year, which is the year for which the land use is forecast, and also for which the transportation improvements are identified. And then the boundaries, and then basically as the land use and transportation plan is approved by both DelDOT, the county, and the towns for Frederica and Cheswold, then that gets added to the agreement. And then DelDOT works with the county and the local governments to actually identify like a specific list of improvements, along with service standards, which basically document like what is considered adequate transportation, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. But basically, like Sarah said, it's iterative, so at each step we come back to you for concurrence and agreement in order to add the different pieces to the agreement. And then finally, once the list of projects and costs are known, then we negotiate the fee structure for it. So for the Little Heaven and South Frederica TID areas, the 2045 is the target horizon year. That's what we've been using for our recent TIDs. It has to be at least 10 years after the most recent census. The participant boundary for these two plans matches the master plan study area, and that governs what parcels are included in the TID. So as they develop or redevelop, those are the parcels that would have to contribute. Then the facilities boundary, the intersections match the intersections that were in the master plan traffic modeling, with the road segments in between each of those intersections included. And then Town of Frederica will be a partner for the South Frederica TID. This shows the proposed Little Heaven TID boundary. So the black area is the land area or parcels that would participate, and it matches the study area from the master plan. And then the purple road segments and green intersections would be the facilities boundary. So those are the roads that we would look at. So what's not shown on here are the new road connections. They would be included also. These are additional intersections that were also included in the synchro transportation modeling that was used for the master plan. And then for the roadways, the master plan primarily looked at capacity improvements. So I think it identified 3 signal improvements along with new roadway connections. But DelDOT would also like to look at the existing status of the roadway in terms of lane width, shoulders width, and shoulder material, and whether the road needs to be widened to meet local road standards, as well as safety things like possible curvatures that need to be adjusted. So basically, this would be the proposed boundary for the TID. And then this is the proposed boundaries for the South Frederica TID. Again, the black boundary is the land area that's covered, and it matches the master plan study area. And then the purple segments and green intersections would be the facilities that we would analyze. And they match the facilities that were included in the traffic modeling for the master plans. So the agreement commits county, DelDOT, and the towns to work together to develop service standards. So level of service D, overall intersection delay in the PM peak and Saturday peak was what was used for the master plans. And so the agreement references that as, and that should be the kind of the first element of the service standards. But we need to work together to identify non-capacity standards, such as lane and shoulder widths, and then also look at bike pedestrian transit standards as well. So basically, that's going to be the next step after the agreements are signed, are to work on the service standards and to identify non-capacity improvements. And then county and DelDOT will work together to develop and adopt a land use and transportation plan for each TID. So right now the agreement has the master plan, land use plan as the land use element of the transportation plan. The agreements also include those new roadway segments and traffic signals that were identified in the master plan in the transportation element. So again, we just need to work on identifying the service standards and non-capacity improvements. And this shows the Little Heaven future land use plan, along with the new roads in gray parallel to Route 1. And then similarly, the South Frederica future land use plan. And then the actual plans include more specific breakdown of square footage for each of the land uses on there. So that's what we'll use as the basically the future land use plan for the TIDs. And then all 3 of us, county, DelDOT, Town of Frederica, will work together to develop a list of improvements and their costs. So basically, once we agree on the service standards and what improvements are needed, then DelDOT puts a cost to them, and then we work on negotiating the fee structure after that. And this just clarifies what we're going to look at when we work to identify transportation improvements. The agreement has the county collecting the TI fees payable by developers prior to building permit issuance. Obviously, there's no fee in the agreement, so nothing's going to be collected until the fee structure is actually added to the agreement. But we like the fee collected prior to building permit issuance. That way it's far along in the development process that basically the development's going to happen, because you don't want to collect fees, store them, and have to give them back. And then The agreement also says that if development exceeds the land use forecast by more than what the threshold is for TIS, so that 50 peak hour trips or 500 daily trips, that a TIS will be required. And then some jurisdictions like to exempt like the first minor subdivision per parent parcel. That's in there for now. We would need to define what a minor subdivision means. I think, Mark, in our manual, it's 5 lots. So we could use that definition unless Levy Court has a definition in your code that you'd rather use. Or we can take that out for now and add that to the agreement later once the actual fee schedule is approved. And then the agreement also includes administrative items, like for instance, if a developer could request to dedicate additional right-of-way or actually make improvements beyond their entrance, they could get a credit for their fee owed. And then, but if, basically, if, and also if there's like if there's safety issues or concerns that we want them to address, both DelDOT and the county have the right to ask them to do that. And then they would get a credit toward their TID fee for those improvements. So basically, they're responsible for their entrance, including turn lanes. And then anything beyond that, even if we require them to do it, it would be credited towards their TID fee. And then the TID participation requirements for the developer need to be on the record plan. And then also they need to enter a separate infrastructure recruitment agreement with both the DelDOT and the county that documents that they're going to participate in the TID instead of the traffic impact study. And then when we develop the fee, it'll be a per unit cost for residential developments, per square foot cost for non-residential development. Because the cost of transportation improvements increases, we have our fees go up January 31st of every year based on the annual consumer price index, up to a maximum of 4% per year. And then basically the TID is effective when the final agreement with the fee schedule is approved and signed. So developers that have already submitted before then basically would be grandfathered, but we'd like to give them the option to request participation in the TID instead of doing the offsites that they've previously been required to do. And then finally, for the monitoring program, DelDOT will monitor traffic volumes in the facility boundary and report our findings to you all in 2025, and then at intervals not to exceed every 5 years. And then that report will include what improvements we think are needed at the time of the report, and then also in the next 6 years in order to possibly be added to our CTP. And then in return, the county, in odd number years to coincide with the development of our CTP, you'll get to prioritize projects and recommend projects for us to prioritize for inclusion in the CTP. And then for Cheswold area, same process and terms in the agreement, except that they haven't done a land use forecast yet for their town, and no transportation modeling has been done yet other than an existing conditions report, which basically showed most of the intersections except for like 2 right on the border of City of Dover are acceptable, are like level of service C or better. Town of Cheswold staff, they're interested and committed to doing this. They would like to wait to have their town execute the agreement until after the transportation improvements have been identified. And that's more of a resource issue for their town because they don't hold town hall meetings all the time. They only do it when they're needed. So the town's going to work with us on this and work with the county on it, and then they'll take it to their town council once it's further along. And this just shows the Cheswold area TID boundaries. So the black area basically between the northern boundary of City of Dover up to the creek up there just south of Smyrna. And then the purple are the road segments and the green are the intersections. And it's a pretty big area and the facilities boundary is pretty large. We may end up needing to talk about cutting that back depending upon what the cost of improvements are. But this is where we would like to start with evaluating transportation needs up there. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
One, and be lengthy, just a little curious. Cheswold. You know, I think of Camden and some other places in the county. How did Cheswold, what prompted Cheswold to get its own TID?
In the county's comp plan, it identifies like the area north of Dover, basically more between Cheswold and Smyrna, as an area for possible future growth. So that's what that was based on.
So any questions or comments here tonight regarding what you've noticed? Okay, said. Mr. Pettit-Demage, I know I've spoken to Ms. Kiefer. Mr. Pettit-Demage, I know you've been instrumental with the new master plan. What's your thoughts on the TID and its presentation?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about the prospect of having TID for both the master plan areas, but I think that really solves a lot of the concerns with, the potential intensity that those plans have identified. Obviously, with the improvements that have been made to Route 1, those areas stood out as holding significant potential for pressure, development pressure. So the master plans were to get ahead of that, and the transportation element of that is so important. So, and we also know that from the development community's perspective, when they can enter into a program like this and not be saddled with scoping out a traffic impact study, and then spending the time and money to do that, and then spend the money to make the improvements as part of their project, in lieu of that, to be able to pay into the overall system, I think it's very attractive for the development community. So I think this is absolutely the right way to go for these master plan areas. And we've seen great success up in the West Town, East Town area, in Newcastle County, around the Middletown community. And we've heard, from the development community of what's going on in Middletown. Why can't other places in the state operate like that? Well, this is an opportunity for our specific master plan areas to function a lot better and have development and transportation in lockstep with each other. So I think it's absolutely the right way to go.
Another comment, maybe your question again, and we're not long, but just a thought. If we could have gone back, would this type of TID applied to, let's say, the town of Magnolia? And I don't mean the town, but I mean the outlying area where it was ground zero for all that growth that was occurring, just out of nowhere. So is this a plan that would fit not just a commercial but residential growth that just expands, let's say, in a 3-mile radius?
Yeah, I mean, basically any area that's identified in a comprehensive plan for an adequate amount of growth. And adequate, again, it's a balancing between the amount of growth and the amount of transportation improvements that are needed. So you can tailor it basically in order to make sure that it works.
So then
It's not just for commercial growth, it works for residential growth as well.
I would end with this one in stating, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Obviously, these two are big. The speed of, I think we've mentioned this, Ms. Kiefer, probably in the first comprehensive plan that I was involved with, these were talked about. So it's kind of exciting that we're fast forwarding this thing and we're here. Once we solidify it and get it moving, what's the next step for getting places like the Magnolia area, personally my district, headed in that direction? Is that a request? Is there some kind of study that would occur? I'm not asking you to make that known tonight, but I'm saying in general terms, how would that work?
Yeah, I mean, basically, you need to identify it as a specific growth area in your comprehensive plan, and take a more detailed, fine-grained look at the future land use potential on a parcel level.
Up enough, and I appreciate that. One more question? Yeah, sure, Commissioner.
Just one more question. So would DelDOT ever take the initiative to do a TID without the request of a town or a county?
I don't think so. I don't think it would work.
But there's no cost associated with doing a TID, right? I mean, a town could say, hey, I want a TID in a certain area, which would help them in the future. But
There's a cost to DelDOT to do the initial traffic
To DelDOT, not to the
study
town
and
or-
everything, and just obviously the process.
Yeah.
Public meeting and everything, but that's it. There's no out-of-pocket costs for a local government to participate.
So you don't mind if I bring this up to Camden? I was looking at Mark. All right, thanks.
Okay, so I guess what's Mr. Pettit, sure.
If I just wanted to piggyback on Commissioner Sweeney's comment, with respect to South Frederica and Little Heaven, I want to compliment DelDOT because, you know, they were a significant partner in the development of those land use plans, and they actually did the traffic analysis work. They basically took the proposed land uses, calculated what the maximum trip generation could be, and you know there was some cost associated with it. I'm not sure what it cost, but Century Engineering worked with DelDOT on that for significant portion of a year in developing the modeling for the traffic, and so I assume that kind of study has to occur when you identify an area. There has to be like an area-wide study to look at, I guess, the baseline, what you have going on now, what the road conditions are, and also then what the future, like in this case, the plan horizons 2045, what that future traffic would look like. So they project it out based on the land use capacity, what the zoning, underlying zoning would allow, and that sort of thing. So anyway, I just wanted to say thanks again. Can't thank DelDOT enough for what they've done thus far, and it was, wasn't free. So, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. With the master plans being done and adopted, that's like half the process done right there. And the traffic modeling is usually what takes the longest. So we're well on our way working in those areas.
Ms. Kiefer, is the next step as simple as just showing a consensus on moving the 3 agreements forward? And would that be set up for, is that a consensus or a public hearing? Consent agenda? So okay, so show of hands, I see a full complement of support for moving the 3 agreements forward. Consent agenda is fine for me, if you're okay. Thank you, DelDOT. Appreciate you. Mark, you did a heck of a job tonight. I mean, great. You really did.
And I do have a brochure about TIDs, so I'll leave them here.
So Mark, I know the kids are getting older. What's causing this?
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Kiefer, would you like to move into the next activity, or is Mike going to jump up and do it? Mike, you want to jump up? Let's go.
Good evening. I'm Mike Miles. I'm the Housing and Community Development Supervisor. What it appears that we're looking to do, and I don't have the memo, so I'll just do this off the top of my head. Now I've got the memo. Oh yeah, I've got this. What are we looking at first? Are we looking at the FY21? Or, okay. What we would like to do is we'd like to put in our application for the FY21 funds for areas throughout the county for housing rehab using CDBG funds. The areas selected are based on the number of people that we have on our waiting lists, and there are other areas that have not that have openings, whereas we've got some target areas and census tract areas that we did in the FY19 budget and the FY20 budget. So with that, the areas that we would like to fund are the town of Smyrna, city of Milford, Census Tract 401, which is basically the Kenton area, all the way to the Maryland state line and up to Newcastle. The Camden area, which I believe that we tried to get approved last year, and that area was not approved. Same for the Cheswold area and the Houston, I'm sorry. The one census tract which does incorporate the city of Harrington is Census Tract 430. We do have a number of folks that are on our waiting list that are in the city of Harrington. So we thought if we could pick up 1 or 2 units there, that would be great. And then there's a surrounding area as well. Then we have 2 underserved neighborhoods, Rodney Village and Kent Acres, and Holly Hills, Hedgerow Hollow, and Lawnside, which are just south of Smyrna. Those are Holly Hills and Hedgerow Hollow are mobile home communities, whereas Lawside's on the other side of the highway. So with that said, we're also looking to do about 10 units of scattered site housing, incorporating 5 homes on owned lots and 5 mobile homes on rental lots. So the total budget that we're going to ask the Housing Authority for is about $743,000. I don't quite think we'll get that much, but it's better to shoot high and see what you can get out of it. We did have a meeting with the Community Development Advisory Committee, and they did approve these particular target areas. So with that said, would anybody have any questions regarding our application for the FY21 funding?
Comments, questions regarding this particular one? There's a couple more coming. I appreciate your time today in conversation. Ms. Kiefer also covered a lot of ground. Having conversations about this grant, which we can all appreciate, it's a wonderful grant. And it is very effective in helping folks in the community. So I think it's great. I think we talked a lot about freeing Mike up, who's sort of not new to the trade, but new to the job and kind of filling a tough role, 2 jobs at once. We've got to fill a spot down there. And then free him up to work with Ms. Kiefer to maybe improve on it, right? And I don't mean improve meaning it was done poorly in the past, but to be more creative, right? So to come up with some thoughts and ideas. So anyway, with that said, I appreciate your effort. I am looking at this first application. Have we just settled in on Resolution 3822, which is authorization to submit the applications? Is that the only one we've done? So I don't want to go through the other 2 yet. Are you going to describe those 2, or are we good to move forward with those also? Mm-hmm. But I guess my point is, are you going to discuss the next 2 right now? Okay, so then he asked if we're good with, if I use it correctly, 3822, and I assume we are, and that would be the conversations about what we're fixing throughout the community, the county, right? Okay, so then we're moving to the second one. Is that fair? All right. Administrative match, if I'm looking at this correctly.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. That's the Housing Authority will give us $175,000, whereas the administrative match would be the same from the county. Last year, I believe it was raised to $200,000 to give us an opportunity to maybe hire some additional help, but it dropped back to $175,000 this year.
We're looking for them in individuals, so we showed a show of hands for 3822, and now we're looking at 3823 and a support for the administrative match, and I assume we're all in agreement there. Okay? I'm going to assume Commissioner Howell is on a yes, so go ahead. I'm sure he is.
The third one is the resolution for fair housing. Basically, everything that we do has to meet the goals of federal fair housing laws.
All right. Now that cooked everything. So show of hands on 3824, Resolution 3824. So just to tie it on a neat bow, what we've done tonight based on this is show support 7-0 for all three resolutions listed in our packet. All right. Guess we're looking at the third part of this now?
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Buxton, just to be double clear, that material goes on to consent agenda for next week?
Whatever's tradition.
The next item has to do with some additional funding from the Housing Authority specific to COVID relief. All right, it's funding that cannot be used for housing rehab. Specifically in the FY20 grant, DSHA included $260,000 that has to be used for COVID-related relief. As Commissioner Buxton said just a few minutes ago, we've been struggling not just with COVID, which slowed us down in the spring, but also a staffing shortage that we're trying to address. And simply don't have capacity to create another program on top of the rehab. So the Housing Authority effectively already has an agreement with the State Service Center to use funds for hotel motel money for the homeless, right? To get people off the street, get folks housed in a way that is safer in general than a congregate shelter, because they can be in their own housing unit. So what staff is suggesting is that the Levy Court sign a revised agreement for the FY20 funding to revert that $260,000 back to the Housing Authority for use in that program. The interest is, again, we don't have capacity to create another program right now, and I think it's imperative that we get the money on the street as fast as we can. So that is our recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, comments? Sure, Commissioner Sweeney.
Thanks, Commissioner Buxton. So, Sarah, what resources are needed for the capacity to be able to handle this ourselves?
For this program?
Yeah.
I don't think we could build the capacity fast enough, but that fourth position would have to be filled. And up and running to take rehab on, ultimately to free Mike up to help us create another program.
Do we have assurance from DSHA that they're going to spend this money in Kent County?
That's what we've suggested in the past with the motion, and if you choose to do it, that's what I would put in the motion, that it has to be used here.
And if they don't, what happens to the funds?
Anything that does, I mean, these are all federal funds. Anything that comes down that doesn't get used ultimately reverts back to the source of funding.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So this is somewhat back here because we had a request earlier in the year, of course, and the idea was that the program itself, it's such a wonderful program, and it wasn't firing on all cylinders. I can tell you after having some conversations Thursday, Friday, and then of course today, I think I have a clearer picture and understanding of why. I do agree, right? That while I think that we could create a program and utilize the funds here ourselves, the reality is, if we believe in the previous program and we believe that it's not firing on all cylinders because we have yet to fill that space, that extra employee, and that's causing a lot of extra work with Mike, then I don't know how I can come in here and say in good faith, yeah, that's fine, but you still got to create a new program. So unlike a couple months ago, I'm in support of moving the money back, or however you want to call it, allowing the Housing Authority to utilize the money. I spoke to the Housing Authority. I do believe they utilize it here in Kent County. But if we need to put it in a motion, we can. Do I need to say that, or has that already been stated now?
What I would do, if you wanted to move this forward to next week, I would write a motion that
Fair
effectively
enough.
says that. I do believe the Housing Authority will act in good faith.
Sure.
It was money allocated to Kent County. They will use it here.
Sure. Fair enough. So I'm in favor of this move. If everyone else is, I guess it's time to show of hands. Show of hands, okay. Commissioner Angel, you good? Right on.
Thank you very
Alrighty.
much.
Yeah. It wasn't too bad. So, are there any public comments? Any public comments related to the,
Doesn't appear that we have anyone left on the phone line. Is that correct, Mark? So,
Mr. President?
All right, Public Works Committee, Commissioner Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll ask Ms. Gold to come forward to address these three issues.
Good evening. The first item on the agenda is Paris Villa London Village Septic Elimination Project Construction Bid Award, Teal Construction. So KCI Technologies was the county's engineering firm for the job. They completed the design and obtained the permits, and we were able to advertise for the construction project for the bids December 4th, 9th, and 20th. 6 bids were received and publicly opened. The bids are shown in the table in the memo. Bids range from $4.428 million to $8.979 million. The low bidder again is Teal Construction. And we would like to have the Levy Court approve that award with funding through the USDA RUS loan and grant, district impact fees. Also, it's contingent upon USDA concurrence.
Any questions or comments? All right. Then all in favor of this going to the consent agenda? 7 up, item 2.
Item 2 is the contract user agreement with Chev Properties LLC, AKA Willis Auto Mall. Chev Properties LLC is the new legal owner name for the property owner. It contains the business known as Willis Auto Mall. The prior agreement was with Willis Chevrolet, Inc. So this is housekeeping technicality with the new legal owner name. Additionally, there are 2 parcels which will be served under the sewer agreement. And with that, the department is going to assume ownership of the force main that originates on the Chev Properties property. This is contingent upon Levy Court approval. The revised agreement has been accepted by the owners. Sewer Advisory Board heard this matter and was in support of it on February 3rd. And that concludes the report on that item.
All right, we discussed earlier, I don't have any problem with it. Consent agenda? 7 up, item 3.
Item 3 is a contract user agreement with Kent County Regional Sports Complex. We have a contract user agreement with the sports complex that's been in place since December of 2016. The contract user agreement needs to be amended for billing for the medical office building that is on an isolated parcel not connected to the main property, and it does not go through the existing sewer meter. The proposed billing is going to be based on fixtures to compute an equivalent dwelling unit assessment, and that's based on the county code. There are also some revisions in the agreement about standard language and clarification on the maintenance responsibility of the sewer systems. The agreement has been accepted by the organization. February 3rd, Sewer Advisory Board heard the matter, and they're in support of it. And that concludes the presentation on that item.
Any, Mr. Buxton?
This is actually not a question for number 3. It's a question for number 1, and if it involves more than 60 seconds, we can talk about it later. Question number 1 for the Paris Villa. Is there a start date estimate?
We have to get the contract agreement in place, the bonds in place, so I'm assuming late March, mid-April, spring.
Actually have a start date, and I don't know the knowledge of this one. A payment agreement, a number. When do we get that calculation?
So We'll be working on that to revise, to provide a user, the user rate for that district. It's not been finalized at this point.
Not been finalized, right? Will it be in the moderate range compared to some of the other projects out there, would you expect?
Yes.
Moderate, okay.
Okay, do we put this, do we have a vote on this yet? No, I'm through, okay. All in favor of consent agenda for next week, presumably? 7 up. Are there any questions on the air or in the public?
We have no callers on the line, so.
Okay, Mr. President, back to you.
Thank you. That concludes our committee meetings for this evening. And we'll move into workshop for FY22 budget review, sewer fund budget.
Mr. President, at this time, I need to leave due to mail, UPS not getting supplies for my patients, for doctors from Milford to Smyrna. I'm about 38 hours behind work, and I'd like to be able to go to our retreat this Saturday. So if you don't mind, I'd like to bow out and leave you in the capable hands of to move forth, and Mr. Pettimage and I will make sure, and Ms. Galt and I will get in contact. But at this time, I need to bow out and leave you all. Thank you.
Have a good evening, Mr. Angel. We're going to stay right here, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so
We have a te-
FY22 sewer fund budget.
So we have a
Ms. Gold?
technical difficulty at the moment. Right now, Mr. Kennedy is going to grab the PowerPoint for me.
Mr. President,
Ms. Sweeney.
in that case, while we wait, yesterday was a birthday for somebody in-house. Yesterday was Terry Pepper's 35th birthday again.
Wow.
So I think in light of his announcement that we sing happy birthday to those whose birthdays were last week, I think we need to sing happy birthday to President Pepper. I'll start. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Terry.
Pepper. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I guess they would say it was sort of a milestone type birthday. So, like I have done for the past 15 years, I take my birthdays off. So I do not work on my birthdays. And
What was
my
President's
wife doesn't like for me to answer the telephone on my birthdays or Christmas Day. So that's what I did.
Thank you.
So it was a good day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Okay, so of course, we're here to talk about the proposed sewer fund budget for FY 2022. The Sewer Advisory Board reviewed the budget at its subcommittee meeting. We had about an hour discussion, and recommendation was brought forward to the board to accept it as it was. Now, there were questions about the budget, and we'll hit some of those probably this evening as well, but that was heard by the Sewer Advisory Board on February 3rd. So this table is similar to the table I just handed out, where the top part is talking about the revenue. I'd like to call your attention to the appropriated retained earnings, which is a line just above the total. So the revenue is showing appropriated retained earnings of $1,078,500 for balancing the budget. The increase from 2021 to 2022 is about 5%. This is the bottom half of the table that was handed out to you. It's page 15 of the sewer fund budget. This is showing the expenses for the different cost centers. And then when we get to the next slides, it'll start talking about different items in there, like the contingency, which is listed on this page. So this budget does not include user and hauler rate increases. However, we think that a rate increase should be considered. Again, I mentioned retained earnings of $1,078,500 is being used to balance the budget. The last uniform rate increase was July 1, 2020, and the prior increase was on July 1, 2007.
Let's go. I'm sorry. This isn't that's here. So anyway, so this year we're using $1 million in savings to cover costs, right? In general terms, is that what you're saying?
This is what we're proposing for the
Yes.
upcoming budget. Not this year, but the upcoming one.
That's what okay. So how about this year? Did we use X amount of savings this year?
No.
So this year, last year, so what brought on the $1 million in extra expenses in general terms?
Capital projects and increases in expenses.
Mainly just cost of doing business
Yes.
to $1 million, all right?
The current, with no rate increases, as is, the quarterly rate for the districts is $77.60 per EDU, and that's for operation and maintenance. Each district has a separate debt service fee, and that varies from district to district. The contract user rate is $2.58 per 1,000 gallons, and the hauler rate is $61.92 per 1,000 gallons. And that's also divided into an operating portion and a debt portion.
Diana, quick question on the terminology user. To all of you, this is old hat. To me, this is brand new. But when I think about a user, are we talking about the towns, like for my district, the town of Smyrna and Clayton, where we actually pay the town sewer rates, we're users? If we propose sewer increases to the users, does that include all the residents where the flow goes from the towns directly into the county?
Okay. So we bill the town of Smyrna.
Yes.
The town of Smyrna bills its residents.
Yes.
The town of Smyrna will likely increase its rates to account for any rate increase that we do.
Okay.
And it may have additional rate increases on its own.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
So again, the difference here being the district uniform quarterly rate. We bill our sewer customers in a district like Hartley or Lipsick or Felton. We bill them on a quarterly rate, and the contract user rate is billed monthly, and it's billed on flows.
So just to add to that, Commissioner Masson, for 11 of the last 12 years that I've been on Levy Court, the Camden, Wyoming Sewer and Water Authority raised their rates to their users in town with the caveat that we have to do it because Kent County's raising their rates. And then we did it for 10 of those 11 years. They blamed it on us, and we never raised our rates. We raised our rates last year, and the town did not raise their rates to compensate for it. So,
I feel the pain.
okay. Ms. Gold, can you go back to the revenue for me real quick?
Expenses?
So
revenue.
that, last year, we did have $165,000 appropriated retained earnings.
Thank you for the correction.
And then this year, we're doing $1 million. So where's that money coming from? I know what retained earnings is in a business sense. Where's that coming from?
So that's called net position is another, I think is a new name for it. So that when, say, in FY19, if you were to look at that column on the sheet that I handed out, you could see that the revenue exceeded expenses in FY19. In FY20, it went the other way around.
Right, so.
So if there's any funds that from that overage, those are considered retained earnings.
Right, so you have retained earnings that go from year to year. If you have 5 years straight of nothing but revenue over expenses, that goes into retained earnings. How much is in retained earnings that's not being appropriated right now?
The retained earnings balance as of June 30th, 2020 was $17 million.
Okay.
In general, what you're looking for a retained earnings balance to allow cash flow is an amount equal to your budget or more.
Right. So it's $17 million sitting in retained earnings over the lifetime of the sewer budget account of revenue over expenses.
So for us, the sewer fund budget is accrual-based accounting. So for cash flow, those retained earnings are also used to maintain our cash flow.
Right.
And they provide part of our bond rating so that we can borrow.
So, but we also use that to counter having to raise rates, but I don't remember seeing that line item on previous sewer budgets over the past 12 years.
We don't use that typically to counter rate increases. It can be used as that, but if it's continually tapped, it's a sign that the rates do need to be increased. And if the appropriate balance is not there, you would need to propose a rate increase rather than continuing to tap retained earnings.
How far down would you feel comfortable letting retained earnings go and still maintain any kind of credit rating?
That would be more of a finance director question.
Yeah.
And my answer on that is that my understanding from the sewer advisory board meeting is that typically you're looking for at least an amount equal to the sewer fund budget, or up to 2 times as much as the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we left off right around here. I think we hit this slide, we talked about the rates. So highlights of the budget in terms of expenses. We're budgeting for emergency capital repairs at the same level. We have money being funded for working capital reserve. So part of the retained earnings also typically includes these reserve fundings. And our operating contingency is shown as $1 million. Now, you say, well, that looks really high compared to the prior year, but there's some things that haven't been subtracted out yet. So contingency will be decreased for any increase in COLA or increases in medical premiums, pension, or OPEB. The funding of the 2% step has been included in the salary lines. There are no COLA adjustments. Any COLA adjustment would come out of contingency. Medical premiums are based on the FY 2021 rates, and if there's an increase, it would be subtracted out of the contingency. So right now, it looks like there's a very healthy contingency. It will be reduced when all these numbers really come in.
Right, but without that contingency, we would only be about 78,000 of the retained earnings being required to balance the budget. Without that $1 million operating contingency, since we haven't had that except only 2 of the last 4 years.
Right, you know what I'm saying is those other expenses will come in, and so that contingency will probably look more like $500,000.
But that's
It'll be anywhere between $300,000 and $500,000, and that contingency after those expenses are determined and the budget is adjusted for those.
Okay, so what are your determinations between the difference of working capital reserve and the contingency funds? What's the difference between the two? I mean, one's $500,000, one's $1 million, but
in terms of expenses, this is where we budget for those lines to put that money away to reserve it for problems that we encounter during the budget. So there's a definition in the budget book that I'm going to try and find, defining what the differences between the two are. I'm not going to find it this year.
I see the one for the operating budget contingency for salaries, medical insurance premiums, pension, and OPEB contributions. So this is for the 2022 year, so if the Levy Court commissioners were so inclined to give raises, we should be assured that the money's already been budgeted for any raises that we possibly could give to the employees on the sewer side, because you're putting this in a contingency fund.
again, our expenses are subtracted out of this. If it does not get subtracted out of this, it remains as a listing of contingency because we have to show a balanced budget.
Okay.
I can get back to you on what the difference is between working capital reserve and,
I know what the
contingency.
operating contingency's for, but I'm just curious what the working capital reserve money, that $500,000 would be used for. It just seems like that's money that just sits there unless we use it for something.
well, for example,
Are
it's
they
being
emergencies?
It's used on the capital projects. There are places when we specify working reserves, working capital reserves in the sewer fund budget under
For
capital
a contract
projects.
change,
Yes.
for a change order.
No, not for a change order. It's shown on the spreadsheet for the capital projects. It's one of the funding sources, not a
Okay.
change order.
Okay. But if a change order comes in for a higher contract, could that money for a change order come from working capital reserve?
The answer is it may. I don't know that that's the first go-to for doing a change order is going to
Okay.
working capital reserve.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about it offline.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Sir?
appreciate the question. In looking at that, and asking the question a few minutes ago, I didn't understand it, didn't get it, I just noticed it. Through your questioning, I better understand where we are now, because then I look and see, and then I see this, and clearly, I'm not as smart as the rest of you cookies, but that helps. So appreciate the question. Keep it up.
So the idea being if retained earnings weren't shown, contingency would be zero. You would never want to have a zero contingency. And we do know those funds to balance those other numbers that aren't there yet.
Right. Right, but contingency to me is we have a leak out in front of Ballin Freer that's going to cost us $80,000 to repair, comes out of working capital reserve, but we also have $250,000 in capital emergency repair funds, and now we have $1 million in another contingency fund, so why aren't those all three together? Why are they separated out as three different items?
So I know that when you have the final budget book, and I'll get back to you
Okay.
on that, it's actually defined in the budget book.
And
I
one of
can't
these-
find it in this brief summary, but
Okay.
it is defined what the difference between those three funds, those pots are.
Yeah, I've got the document in front of me, so if you just call me or text me and let me know if it's in there, that'd be
So
perfect.
I may not find it in this document, it may be in the regular budget book.
Okay, all right, sounds good, thank you.
So the pension contributions currently accounted for in the budget are based on the prior year's numbers. So contingency would be adjusted to subtract out the pension contribution. That's not accounted for. Same thing with the OPEB contributions. There are numbers that are not accounted for and would be subtracted out of that contingency, lowering the contingency to what you would see as a more typical number. Major capital expenses by cost center include trucks for engineering, a van for environmental program, a utility gator, and the general labor and equipment contract. We budget for the general labor and equipment contract under operations and maintenance. It's used in both cost centers. So here you can again see the general labor and equipment. It's not a double accounting. There's actually two different cost centers. We have additional trucks that were being purchased, upgrading flow meters, wet well rehabilitation, a large pump repair. So that was the, I'll call minor capital projects that are listed by cost center. In the large spreadsheet, that is our capital project budget. The capital projects total is $20 million, basically. So in that, we have the TMDL study for the water quality standards. There's $160K. Total funding estimated is $2.8 million. Funding sources: main system capital improvement fees, countywide impact fees. TMDL off-site nutrient reduction project, $100,000 installment, Funding estimate $400,000. Funding source, main system impact fees. Land acquisition to extend effluent flow limits. Continued funding of $400,000. Estimated funding $9.4 million by 2026. Funding source, main system capital improvement fees. Plant-wide power generator, $5.4 million. Funding source is State of Delaware revolving fund loan. Biosolids capacity expansion. Funding of $10 million this fiscal year. Total budget estimated $23.4 million. Funding sources, main system capital improvement fees and State of Delaware revolving fund loan. So if you were looking at the spreadsheet portion of your budget, that starts on page 27. This is just highlighting those projects that are in the FY 2022 column. And it talks about the funding source for each one. And then when you get down to the end of the spreadsheet, you end up with a breakout by funds. Clarifier 3 and 4 mechanism replacement. This is the first of 2 years of funding at $400,000. Total budget estimated $800,000. The funding source is operating revenue. Pipeline condition assessment, second of 4 installments at $1 million. Budget estimate $4 million. Funding sources are operating revenue and Delaware State revolving fund loan. Punch and run transmission bypass. We're budgeting $1.2 million to completely fund the project. The total estimate is $2.6 million. The funding source is main system capital improvement fees. Route 13 force main relocation South Dover. That's taking that piece from Punch and Run going south to Camden. The budgeting for the full project is $5 million. The funding source is State of Delaware revolving fund loan. So we're also doing pump station upgrades. We budget $75,000 a year for replacing generators. Funding source is operating revenue. Equipment. The first of 2 years of funding is included in the budget at $150,000. The total cost estimate for a biosolid spreader is $300,000. We want to do a radio equipment upgrade project. Total cost of the project is $150,000. This is the first of 2 years of funding. This year it's $75,000. The funding is operating revenue. Special projects. Workflow management and document retrieval software. This is the third year of 4 years of funding. The budget is $75,000 and the total project estimate is $350,000. The funding source is operating revenue. So if you were looking on page 35 of your budget, what you're looking at is that in FY21, we were looking at less than $1 million of operating revenues being used for capital projects. It's actually $884,000. As we look from FY22 to FY 2026, we need $1 million to $1.2 million to fund our capital projects. So looking at that, we're showing a need for operating revenue. So right now, if we need $1 million in retained earnings to balance the budget, as we move forward, we're going to need more funding. So in the past, the county has looked at doing rate increases, and when we've done them, they've historically been very large. 9%, 10%, 15% even. The 15% one was done in FY 2006. So rate increases need to be considered as we're looking at using retained earnings to balance that budget. So what does a rate increase mean? Trying to estimate out a number, assuming flows are consistent, because you can have a wet year and you can have a dry year. But assuming a good number, hopefully a 1% rate increase generates $152,000. And if flows are consistent, a 5% increase generates $760,000. Again, we're looking at potentially using over $1 million to try and balance the budget. So those are just the food for thought ideas I wanted to put out for you. I don't know what other questions you might have for me.
Yeah, I have a question, Diana. So the operating revenues that you're referring to over the next 5 years is estimated to go, is projected to go from $884,000 to $1.223 million.
Yes, and there's some other numbers in between that are higher and lower.
So, but you're not using operating revenues to balance capital projects, right?
So when you go to this table, and it says, transfer to capital projects fund,
Right.
that $1,054,000 in the FY '22 column
Yep.
should match to the $1,054,000 in this column
Okay.
on this spreadsheet. When you look at FY '22 here and FY '22 on the single page,
So that transfer is kind of revenue excess over expenses that you're able to transfer to capital projects.
it's not revenue over expenses, it's what we need to transfer. It's the operating revenue that we would need to have for doing those projects.
Okay. So what you're recommending then is some kind of consistent rate increase on an annual basis through the next 5 years?
That's one option, yes. Whether it's over 5 years, little ones over, there are multiple ways to do that. But I am suggesting that there needs to be a rate increase considered.
Okay, so you followed that right after your discussion about all the capital projects. That's why I was tying the two together. Is there a way, and I know this is a big ask, to go and project out what the operating budget is going to look like over the next, 'cause every time we see an operating budget, it's like, here's what we've done for the past 5 years. Well, if I knew what we did for the last 5 years, I can kind of extrapolate out what the next 5 years is going to look like. Can you take, and for all those funding lines, extrapolate out the next 5 years what the operating revenue and operating expenses are going to look like?
You can estimate out, but it's never going to be exact.
I don't want it to be exact. There's no exact numbers in projecting what's going to come in the next 5 years, guaranteed.
So going with that, there are unexpected expense increases. For example, the cost of chemicals, ferric and lime, that
Right,
all of
but-
a sudden they jump in price.
Right, but you have experience in your field over the last 30 years that you've been doing this to know every 5 years those companies come up with an increase, or every 2 years they increase the cost for ferric chemicals, but you know that. I can sit at my school and tell you, here's what I think is going to cost us in expenses for the next 5 years. I can do a 5-year strategic plan pretty easily and tell you what I think my budget should be, based on the 25 years I've been in this field, knowing how things change. I'm asking the county to do the same thing for operating. Capital's perfect because you already can say, we know that that project's going to cost $2 million in 2025. And between now and then, we have to save this much money every year in order to make that $2 million. But I would like to see, here's what we think operating revenue has been for the last 10 years. Here's what we think it'll be for the next 5 years, based on past history.
Yeah, the catch with that is that you have those years of high flow and years of low flow, which are seasonal and unpredictable. Can I throw out a number to you? Yes. Do I have a crystal ball? No.
I can promise you from the person sitting behind this sign right here, not going to hold you accountable for telling me that next year or 2025, I'm not going to come back and say, Diana, you told me 4 years ago this is what it was going to be. Why isn't it that? That's not what I'm asking for. I'm not asking for exacts. I'm just asking for your professional estimate for what you think operating expenses and operating revenue will be for the next 5 years. Is that possible?
I can go back and talk with Susan and see what we can come up with.
Okay. If she has any questions, don't ask her to call me.
Will do.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Colton, we're not making a final decision tonight. We're not even pushing you in the correct direction tonight. We could potentially have that conversation over the weekend at the retreat, potentially? Or are you looking for us to give you some sort of definitive direction tonight?
If there are any outstanding questions or anything that would help bring the commissioners to consensus, I'm looking for that direction.
Pick. You're the king right now. What do you need to do to make this thing function for the next 5 years? Is 5 years a fair number? Is that what you're looking at? Is it 1 year? Is it next year?
So
Just I'll hold you.
I think we need to determine what's considered a small increase, and then we can figure out how far that gets us. I mean, we look at the budget every year, and every year we should consider, is there a need for a rate increase? And that's what we're doing this year. What I think is hard for people to, it's COVID. You've got folks who aren't going to be able to, what they consider a small increase and what I might consider a small increase aren't necessarily the same. So, you know, you've got folks, is this the right time to do it? Well, we always need to talk about it.
So,
And there's a sign looking at the capital projects budget that this is going to be a problem looking out, you know, over that 5-year timeline. So it's appropriate that we bring this forward.
are there any requests for spending listed in the 5 or 6 previous slides, whatever it was, out of the that are paid for by the general fund? I think you said in there, you said something.
Nothing in this budget is paid for by the general
Not that you're
fund.
missing the, slow down. The general fees fund out of your budget. You used the terminology just a minute ago. 2, 3 slides ago, you said it's paid for by, what was some of the term?
So we talked about the rates, the contract user rate. Are you talking about the funding sources at the bottom? We talked about operating revenue?
So operating revenue, what is operating revenue? Operating revenue is user fees?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to describe. So then let's go forward. Then I'm going to ask you, this is why I said, can we wait till Saturday? Because I'd be happy not to hold this meeting up and have the conversation directly with you. If you need more direction, I'm going to have to ask some questions that may only make sense to me. So here's where we are. I asked, what would you do if you're in charge? What would it look like coming from you? And you said an incremental, small increases would probably be your selection.
Mm-hmm.
That would be your selection. What is an incremental small increase? 0.5%, 2% a year? Did you state that yet?
I've not stated that yet, and I can try and bring you those options at the retreat or in further discussions, but that's really not there yet. So that's also the problem I have when we talk with the Sewer Advisory Board. What do they consider small? Do they consider 0.5% small? In the past, we've done rate increases that were 10% and 15% at a time. So right now, for me, if the last increase was 10%, I might consider 5%, half as much, small. That doesn't mean that everyone feels the same way.
I guess what I'm looking for is we have this deficit, right? We're looking to address the deficit. But rather than hit it with a big number, we're looking at slow playing it. I think we have to look at, this is a specific fee for a specific service. So it's easier for me to grasp increasing the cost. It just is. What is it when you say small? If it's 70, let's say it's 70, for the sake of argument, it's $78 a quarter, okay? What is small? It goes to 80 per quarter, or does it go to 95?
So I think about a 4% increase was about $12 a year. It might have been like $13 a year.
4% considered small for you? $12 a year, not even a quarter, $12 a year.
$12 a year.
4%, oh yeah, 4% is about $3.40 a
Well,
quarter.
whatever, so let's just say it's $4 or $12, so there it is. Would that be enough to cover the shortfall, or is that considered a large?
So
Would that be a modest increase? Would that be what you considered a small increase?
that would be a modest increase, but I'm trying to find the slide where I had the numbers on. I think it was the last one, actually. Oops. Oh. So we're looking at $1 million. So I mentioned 4%. At a 4% increase, we would still need to use retained earnings, but it starts sending us in the right direction
Retained earnings,
to do to balance the budget. So we're using retained earnings of $1 million.
right?
So if my target is $1 million, 4% is going to generate less than 760,000.
Right.
5% is the 760.
We're moving in the right direction, and eventually we catch up.
Well, you have to keep considering, where do you want to be?
I just want more direction because it's a fee, it's a service fee. It has to pay for itself, I understand that. Within reason, we have to require folks to pay for this service, right? Regardless of the times we're in. And so if we're talking about $30 a year, let's just say, $30 increase a year, I think if that's what's required, I'm going to ask you earlier, pick those slides that don't require us to take action, that we don't have to do. Is there any slide that you've shown that we don't have to do in your mind?
No,
Right.
we've already pushed out projects.
Right. So with that stated, then what is it that we have to do to match the shortfall is what I'm looking for in direction. And again, I don't have to say it tonight, but that's what I'd be looking for. What is it that we have to do to meet that? You know?
Appreciate the direction.
If I'm way off over
No,
here, it is what it is.
I think it was good. Any other questions?
Now, who the Phillies are going to get to pitch the third rotation?
That's an important question.
Good ones, but I'm working.
You're still looking for that crystal ball and ain't here.
Get in the ballpark, then I can help out with a decision. Commissioner Howell, what are we doing? What would you recommend? Commissioner Howell, I would like to hear from you tonight as the chairman of this department. I was clear with the grant, the CBHIBA. You're the chairman. What would you recommend that we do moving forward?
I hate tax increases. All right? Get that firmly implanted. I hate tax increases. And
Tax.
I'm not crazy about rate increases, but that depends on so many different factors. And, if we do have a problem with a shortfall, the most modest increase in rates is where I'd go to deal with the problem. But other than that, that's basically my philosophy.
You don't have an expectation in numbers. So if it was 8%, it looks to me like it's going to be, it's going to be about 8% to cover the shortfall in 1 year. And then we just flatline it there. We're not looking at another 8% raise after that.
So that's the hard part with the crystal ball about where things go, because no matter what I set the bar as, and even though Commissioner Sweeney said he wasn't going to hold any numbers against me, I'll never get the numbers exactly right.
So you go with 8%?
That doesn't mean there wouldn't be another shortfall.
With an increase.
Here's some real numbers for you. Based on my sewer, North Magnolia, which is $190 every quarter. A 4% would mean $30 per year. 5% being $38 a year, and 8% would be $60 a year or $61 a year.
But it's not a 4% on the 190, it'd be only 4% on the 7760.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you got the 70,
So that'd
the
be-
difference between the 7760 and 190 is what you're paying for the
debt.
right. So 7760 times 4% is only about $2.80 or something, times 4. So you're looking at less than $12 a year.
About $12.50 a year.
Yeah. So about $12 a year. But that 4% doesn't get the $1 million that she's taken out. You have to do a 7% increase in order to get close to that $1.078 million to balance the budget out of reserves, 7% increase. So a 7% increase on $77,000 is, or 77 per quarter is, or 78, what's that? About $3 a quarter, a little more than $3 a quarter. No, about $5 a quarter, so it'd be $20 a year. So you go from 190 to 210.
If I could,
Oh, Commissioner Hall.
yeah, just an observation, I guess. So last year, we had to take 165,000 out of the savings. This year, we're taking out over $1 million. So that if you had to draw a trend line, I would say that we should expect next year to be worse than this year. And that the conservative thing to do would be to just set a rate that erases the deficit this year and see what happens next year, rather than do anything less, because whatever gap we don't fill with revenue this year will just be that much worse next year. Unless suddenly, for unexpected reasons that I can't predict, we would, not continue that trend. So, I mean, I
So
guess
we have
what
a
I'm.
whole lot of development, a whole lot of, whether it's residential or commercial, that's one of the things that helped defray rate increases over that 12-year period that we had previously. So, growth.
But we would be able to see that growth now, right? There'd be houses under construction now that would be generating flow in the next 2-3 years. And I don't know of any developments like that. I don't know of anything going on in the county that would reverse this trend unless anyone else here does. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm just recommending it might be prudent to just set a rate that makes the deficit disappear entirely and then see what happens next year.
Right, but the big difference between last year, the 165,000 in appropriated returned earnings, and this year's 1.78 million was the $1 million in contingency fund that we've never had in there before. So you take that 1 million out, and you're down to only 78,000 in returned earnings needed. But I understand why the $1 million is in there. Don't get me wrong. I understand why it's in there. It's to counter anything that could happen over the next year. And if nothing happens, you've got that $1 million left over in your budget for next year. So that's why I was trying to get some kind of trend in revenue, because if you look at expenses, the big ones are treatment plan administration went from $5,789,000 down to $5,763,000. Maintenance went from $5,186,000 down to $5,079,000. So there's expenses that are trending down also. But it's that $1 million line item that killed us.
Your estimate was that we would eat into that contingency $300,000 to $500,000 for COLAs, things that we could predict.
Yeah, I believe we'll eat up at least half of that.
Right. So I guess maybe then we just wait. We just keep this in the back of our minds, so when we make those decisions, it always comes down to that slide, the hard decisions. That one PowerPoint, what are we going to do? And that will chew into that contingency, and maybe that's the time where we decide, okay, this is the real contingency. X amount goes back into reserves, whatever you want to call it, and then the rate is the last decision we make. I don't know.
So, Mr. Petty, have we ever gone to, hey, I bet you don't have in front of you, what was the sewer fund share of the 2% pay raises that we gave this past year?
I don't have the.
Yeah, it wasn't $1 million.
Well, no. I think you're on the right track here. I mean, this is a balancing act between expenses and revenue, right? So when they do the budget and they laid out the expense budget, they said we need to put $1 million in contingency because we know we're going to have some of these like things that we aren't accounted for yet, things like increases in healthcare. If Levy Court approves a cost of living adjustment, those things have to come out of somewhere, or throws the budget off. So, so it is a balancing act between that contingency to a certain extent and that dipping into savings. The two areas of the expense side that increased significantly are debt service. You see the debt service, which is the last line, interest expense, it increased 162,000, and then the transfer into the capital projects fund, there's an additional like 210,000 there to cover capital project costs above what the current year is. So those are like kind of the big, and then the big gorilla in the room is the contingency. But it has to balance itself. And the working capital reserve is a contingency also. And I believe it's probably set up to be used differently than the $1 million contingency. It's more like probably for capital projects type expenses as opposed to non-capital project expenses, but it is a contingency as well. And so just wanted to throw that out there. I think eventually when we get down to the actual budget, and those numbers may be adjusted.
So I found last year's FY 2021 action items. Medical insurance increased at 7.1%. Of that, 89,000 was the sewer fund. For a 1% COLA, the cost to the sewer fund for 1% was only 38,000 and 2% was only 76,000. So even with those two budget administrative payroll items, you're only looking at about 150, 160,000, not even close to the million. So is there any way to cut that million down, which reduces the amount of retained earnings and certainly makes your budget look much better?
I think the things that could hit it harder would be the healthcare, OPEB, pension.
So, but OPEB's not coming out of this contingency fund, is it?
Yes, it is.
So you're including OPEB in that too?
Anything over the base, would have to, if it.
Anything
the
that's
actuary
not
says you need
accounted
to
for now.
increase it X number above what it previously was, then that's where it would be.
So then what's included in the administration cost of $2.5 million under engineering? That's just if we did nothing?
That includes the 2%, I think 2%.
Yes.
Because the pension contribution
step.
last year was to just the sewer fund was $952,000. Is that administrative or is that coming out of contingency?
No, I think it's built into the base budget.
So it's built into the base
and
budget.
then
So
any
pension
overage
is, OPEB is not. OPEB is $638,000. I can't believe that 638 is coming out of contingency.
OPEB is budgeted as it was the prior year.
Yeah, that's what I'm
If there's
saying.
a change between the OPEB last year and what it's going to be for the FY '22 budget, that's what's going to come
So
out of
just the
contingency.
change, not
Any
the
increase.
total.
The delta.
Any increase. So it still is going to be minimal, not $638,000. If that's what the estimate was last year. So the difference between 638,000 and what it actually was for last year is what would have come out of contingency.
Right, so what you're showing is the contingency right now for '21 is the $294,600. At this point last year, when we were doing this, that number was larger than $294,600.
Right.
So every year when we're here at this point, that number is much larger, and then it gets subtracted when we prepare the next round of books, the county administrator's version of the book, when those numbers come in.
Okay.
Commissioner?
I'm good.
If I may, just, where am I? I believe. There we go. Now I'm trying to get us out of here. What am I looking for? It's just what I said earlier, that I think we've had a good discussion here. You've got some guidance. I think what I'm looking for is, I don't believe this is considered a tax. It just isn't. It's specific for what it costs to operate that facility. It just is, right? we call it enterprise fund, I guess, if that's the correct terminology.
It's
So
the correct
point-
term.
So the point that I make is, what is it that we have to do to make it so that your operational costs match your expenses, maybe even with a slight overage within reason? That's what I'd ask from you at a later date, whether it's when we make that final paper decision on 2% and COLA and whatever else, or if it's this Saturday. Could it be that it looks like it's a 5% need, because based on maybe some of the comments that were, maybe we start out with 5 instead of the full 9 to cover, which probably won't be a full million and some change. So does that help? That's where I need to be. I'd
You
like
need
some help.
options.
I like your thinking, right on? Whether it's Saturday or whether it's during the budget hearing, you guys decide that, I don't care.
I appreciate your time.
Better do it in March. When are we doing that thing? The Phillies.
Yeah, is there anything else you folks want to talk about, like, price of tea in China or something else? Extend this just a little bit further. Now, I'm satisfied, and I have to say that at the end of this, that I didn't really disagree with anything that was said tonight, because I know what you're going through. I know the process. We don't want to take more money from the constituents than we have to, but if it's verified that we're going to have a shortfall, we're going to have to do something. That is something we're all investigating. So I'm ready to adjourn if we have the president's blessing.
I'm good. I'll gladly take a crystal ball, though.
Have to take it out of contingency. Don't forget the retreat on Saturday, 8 o'clock, right here in this room.
Conference recording has been turned on.
We will have some food, yes. We're not cooking omelets or anything like that, but. Yes, Alan got out of here, though. I'm a little concerned because he said about his work or something, but. Hey, Terry,